If you forget everything in this video, just make sure you do this one thing. Hi everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is Sarah, I'm a junior doctor working near London, and today we will be talking about the SJT. Yes, it's a scary exam, but it's completely manageable, and if you follow these simple steps, there's no reason why you can't do incredibly well. In this video, we're going to be talking about what the SJT is, what it entails, the structure of the exam, because once you've got the rules of the game down, then you should be able to have a really good game plan and score really highly in this exam. After that, we'll be talking about the new changes that they've added to the exam this year and how you can adapt to this. Finally, and most importantly, we'll be going through some strategies and tips that you can use to approach this exam so that you can score as highly as possible. These are tips that I and other people have used to do really well in this exam, and if you follow them, then there's no reason why you shouldn't score highly yourself. Let's get started. Let's talk about the structure. Every question in this exam is going to fit under one of the following 4 GMC domains. So these are knowledge, skills and performance, safety and quality, communication, partnership and teamwork, and maintaining trust. So they are assessing the professional attributes that a foundation doctor in the UK should have once they start working. The exam specifications does say that there is no clinical knowledge that's needed for this exam. However, they do test your knowledge of the GMC guidelines, so the General Medical Council guidelines, as well as assuming knowledge of insight as to what it's like to work on the wards and what it's like to be a junior doctor. So there are some assumptions there. The total score of the SJT is out of 1,040, and that's scaled down to a score of 50 points, and that's how you usually will get your score. So they have a very helpful graph which shows the scoring is actually clustered, which means that it's very hard to get a very low score or a very high score. Most people will score around 36 to 46 points, with 46 being a really, really good score. So that brings us to our first point, which is you need to answer every question, and by doing that already you're probably going to be in the main cluster. Now the point of this video is to get you from being in the main cluster in the middle to getting a very good score, but I'm going to be reiterating the importance of answering every question. Let's talk about the format of the exam. There are 75 questions and you have 140 minutes to get through them. That means that unfortunately, compared to last year, you only have 1 minute and 50 seconds to respond to each question. Now don't worry, later on in the video we're going to talk about timekeeping and the different timestamps that you can use so that you make sure that you're sticking to time and answering all those questions. There are 3 types of questions in this exam. The first type is a rating question, and this is new in this exam. So you've got 18 scenarios where you need to rate different options in order of appropriateness. And we'll go through this in more detail, but each scenario can have between 4 and 8 individual questions. That amounts to between 72 and 144 questions. The second type of question is an MCQ, and that's where you pick the 3 best options out of 8. There are 20 MCQ questions. Finally, you've got ranking questions where you pick the most appropriate and you go down to the least appropriate thing. And there are 37 ranking questions. So the rating questions have up to 32 marks up for grabs. The MCQ questions make up 12 marks per scenario, and the ranking questions are also 20 marks. So that brings us on to the next point, which is that the ranking questions actually have a very big weighting in this exam, and that's why it's very important that you make sure you time keep properly so that you have enough time to get to those questions, because you really don't want to miss that amount of marks that are way at the end of the paper. In terms of the changes this year, there are a couple. First of all, you now have the choice to do this exam at home or in a centre, and everything is going to be online. Health Education England has a really helpful video which shows you the different changes that have been put in place, and they also go through the security measures that would be put in place if you decide to take your exam at home. I won't talk about test windows because you must have all already booked your exam and will be taking it either in December or January. They've added a couple of new question types which may or may not be included in the exam, and these include evolving dilemmas. So that's where they will pose a question and then there'll be follow-up questions about the same dilemma. And the point of the scenario is to be more representative of real life, where situations will evolve with time and you will have to make follow-up decisions on that specific situation. The next type is speech dilemma. So this focuses on communication with different people and how you will address difficult scenarios. Finally, you have multimedia elements. So as the word suggests, there will possibly be a number of video-based questions that you'll have to answer. So as we said, there are 18 scenarios in the ranking question, and you can have from 4 to 8 different sub-questions within that scenario. There are 3 formats of the rating questions. It's going to be either rate the following appropriateness of a specific action, rate the importance of the following consideration, and rate the appropriateness of the following response. The most important thing for these types of questions is to make sure that you give each response independently of the other one. So you wouldn't say that A is most appropriate, followed by B, followed by C. You're answering them each independently without any link to the other. So if A is appropriate, it's because it's the most appropriate and nothing else. The best way to understand this is to do the sample paper on the Pearson VUE website. Now the exam has no negative marking, so again, please answer every single question. If you don't listen to anything I say, please just remember this point. That is the absolute best way that you can score at least in the middle cluster of this exam. Now there's something called a near miss marking in this exam, and the best way to explain this is to just show you. So as you can see in this question, the ideal answer is D, C, E, A, B. You get 4 marks for each correctly placed letter. If you made a mistake and swapped 2 letters, for example D and C, you would get 3 marks for each letter. So that would be 18 points instead of 20. If you swap D and E, you would get 2 marks for each letter, and that would give you a total of 16 points. And if you swapped over D and A, you would get 1 point for each of those options. And that shows you that the closer you are to the right answer, the more points you get. So that brings me on to my next tip, which is, whenever you have a ranking question, I strongly advise you to pick the most appropriate and the least appropriate option. Usually the harder questions to answer are the middle ones because they look very similar to each other and they're all right, but some of them are slightly more appropriate than others, and it's very open to interpretation. So pick the one that you think is the most appropriate, and then think the one that is absolutely something that the ideal F1 would not do. Once you have those, even if you get all the middle ones wrong, because there's no negative marking and because of the near miss marking phenomenon, you will have most of the points of this question already, so 16 points out of 20 for a really hurried response. And that is a really good deal. Make sure you use this technique because that will help you get through questions very quickly, maxing out your marks with minimal effort. This tip will save you time, give you more marks, and generally make the questions easier to answer. Okay, so we've gotten to the best part of the video, which are the tips. We've already talked about a couple of tips throughout the video, but I'm going to reiterate them here when we get to them. The first thing I want to mention is a reminder of what the point of this exam is. I know a lot of people around you may be discouraged by this exam and the lack of practice papers that there are, as well as the actual importance of this exam and how much it will determine for the future. Many people around you will probably say that this exam doesn't actually measure anything significant. Whilst there is a lot of debate around this issue, I think the main thing to remember here is what is being assessed, and that is, what would an ideal FY1 do in this situation? So every question you need to address as an F1. Don't think above the level, because some options in the questions are going to be very appropriate for a senior level like a registrar or a consultant. But remember, those will be completely inappropriate a lot of the time for you because you would be risking patient safety and doing the things that are outside of your remit. For this exam, I think it's really important to start early. Many of you will probably already have done the official papers or have started question banks. And I think what's really important is to manage your time effectively. I would advise to give yourself a couple of weeks. I had about a month and a half to prepare for this exam, and generally I found that the people who did pretty well in this exam had around the same time. It gives you a comfortable period to read around the exam, learn about the structure of questions and the rationale, and enough time to strategize your study technique and practice your timekeeping so that you're quick enough for this exam. The next tip is having a game plan. Like everything in life, you need to have a plan of how you will study. This is what I suggest. Start off with getting used to the structure and type of questions. It's really important that you understand the 3 different types of questions that are going to be in the exam, and make sure that you understand the differences between the keywords that are used and what implication that has on the answer and your reasoning. I would advise you not to timekeep in the beginning, because if you're focusing on your time, you won't really focus on strategy and reasoning and structure, and it's more important that you get that down first before you focus on your timing. Once you've understood the structure of the questions really well, I would strongly advise you to focus on your rationale, and that's something that we're going to talk about. So this is all about understanding what makes a question correct rather than wrong and the nuances in between. Once you've done that, then comes the timekeeping. A lot of people, I think, make the mistake of focusing with timekeeping because everybody has told them, oh, you know, it's really hard in this exam, you don't have enough time to finish, but actually they end up missing really crucial steps that they need to get down before timekeeping. So once you've gone through the first 2 steps of understanding the structure of the exam and getting through the rationale, and I would argue that the rationale is the most important step, then you get to the timekeeping. And this is an incredibly important step because no matter how good you are at the questions and no matter how logical your rationale is, if you don't finish the exam on time, it's very unlikely that you're going to get a good score. During the exam, it's really important that you keep a track of your time. So whether that be every 2 minutes that you look at the clock or every hour, you need to have a system that works for you. I wouldn't advise either of those 2 because one I think is too often and the other not often enough. So what I would recommend is to check your timing every 20 to 30 minutes so that you can stay on track and readjust if you need to. I've done a simple breakdown of how long each question type should take you, just to give you an idea of the timekeeping that I would find useful. Feel free to use that if you'd like, or if you want to make your own, then do so. But prepare this before the exam so that on the exam day, you know exactly how you're going to timekeep and you can stay on track with your timing. For the rating section, it should take you about 2 minutes per question, and that adds up to a total of around 36 minutes. For the MCQs, I would give myself about 1.5 minutes for each question, and that would total to 30 minutes. Finally, for the ranking section, you'll have about 2 minutes per question, and that amounts to 74 minutes. Again, as you can see, because the ranking question has quite a lot of marks that you can score, you should allocate quite a big portion of your time to that. And to reiterate the importance of answering all the questions, just by guessing a ranking questions, you can get 14 out of 20 marks. That is much, much better than 0 out of 20. And on top of that, if you use the technique of ranking the most appropriate and the least appropriate, you will hands down get 16 out of 20 if those two are correct. And the rest in the middle, it's okay if they're not in the exact right order. We'll be applying all the tips that I've mentioned in this video, and you'll see how you can answer questions quickly and efficiently, and you can do the rest of the official papers by yourself using the same reasoning. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and share with anyone who might benefit from it. Comment down below if there's anything you'd like to see in the future, as well as if you have any SJT questions that you'd like answered. I'll see you in the next video.